2024 coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here's the video that you came here for. So we just talked about Keshad Johnson committing to Arizona, what it means for the Wildcats, what it means, the Arizona Wildcats, that is, what it means for their season ahead, how good they can be, all that good stuff. I bring it up to say, though, that there is another very interesting perspective on the Keshad Johnson commitment, and it comes from the school that's perceived to have finished in second place. So I often say that sometimes in sports, when we talk about games, wins, losses, the more interesting story is often in the losing locker room. And I think in the case of Keshad Johnson, the more interesting story might be not with Arizona and the impact that he can have there, but with the school that is the perceived runner-up in his services. I am, of course, talking about the University of Kentucky, which we don't know for sure was the second team. But he took a visit to Kentucky. Kentucky rolled out the red carpet for him. Kentucky fans, by all accounts, really wanted this guy. And instead, Kentucky falls short. And with it, in an offseason where Calipari had to hit home run after home run after home run, it is yet another disappointment in what is a very frustrating offseason. And so I want to break it all down, but I will tell you this, Kentucky fans. I told you about 4 or 5 weeks ago, John Calipari had to be more aggressive. John Calipari couldn't wait in the transfer portal. You guys, not all of you, but a lot of you came after me. Torres, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, apparently I do. And it is now late May, and Kentucky is very much scrambling. So let's get into it. And with Keshad Johnson and from the Kentucky perspective, again, we just hit on the Arizona perspective, but from the Kentucky perspective, I would argue you can't call this like a colossal failure by the coaching staff, because I don't believe at any point this kid was perceived to be a Kentucky lean. In a lot of ways, I think they did a good job of making up ground with Keshad Johnson, because the perception publicly was that Arizona was always the school to beat. I had heard that maybe he even made a silent commitment to them, but to Kentucky's credit, they got him on campus. The visit went well by all accounts. And I do think that for a moment in time, Keshad Johnson did seriously consider going to Kentucky. At the same time, though, they don't get him, and it is crushing, in my opinion, for 2 reasons. One, he's kind of just the guy that they needed. And it was interesting, right? Because when his recruitment really picked up about 2-3 weeks ago, I said, like, Kentucky, this is the guy, if Kentucky fans, this is the guy that you want. And the first blush was, oh, he averaged this many points per game, and and then I think Kentucky fans kind of looked into him, and they saw that, frankly, I was right. He's big. He's athletic. He guards his butt off. He's a veteran, 70-plus college starts at this point, played in a Final Four, played for a national championship. And so as time went on, Kentucky fans started to see what I saw in him, in that this was the perfect fit, the perfect player, the perfect this, the perfect that. Not that he was going to come in and be a 20-point-per-game scorer, but that he had the experience, the toughness, the physicality, the defensive chops to be a really good player for Kentucky. So you can't call it a colossal failure that they didn't get him, but at the same time, this was the guy that they needed. And this specifically is why Kentucky, they're in scramble mode right now, okay? It is because without Keshad Johnson, as of right now, as I record in late night, May 21st, 2023, so you can listen the morning of Monday, May 22nd, 2023, whatever. Point I'm trying to make. It's May 21st as I record. And as of right now, here's Kentucky's current 2023-2024 roster. As I record right now, they have 7 total players, 5 true freshmen, 2 sophomores who barely played one game total after SEC play started. So going into the year in college, going into a year in college basketball that, because of the COVID waiver, will be older than college basketball has ever been before. In a year where experience clearly matters. In a season where UConn and Miami and San Diego State and all these older veteran teams made a Final Four. Kentucky right now has 7 total players, 5 freshmen, 2 sophomores, meaning they need 3 more commitments, whether it's players withdrawing from the NBA draft or commitments via the portal or high school. They need 3 more commitments just to be able to run 5-on-5 in practice. That's where we are on May 21st. And so this is just such a frustrating offseason. And where I want to go now is, Kentucky fans, I tried to warn you about this. I tried to tell you that John Calipari was moving too slow, and you guys and girls, not all of you, but some of you, you didn't want to listen. I tried to tell you this was going to happen. I tried to tell you this was going to be an issue, and nobody wanted to hear it, okay? I want to read you a tweet that I sent out on April 5th, 2023, okay? It was shortly after the Final Four, when the transfer portal was really humming, and there were quite a number of players in the portal and quite a number of players who had already been contacted. Some players had already committed by this point. So I sent out this tweet on the day that Ugonna Onyenso actually entered the transfer portal. Now, the good news for Kentucky, he's one of those sophomores on this roster. He ended up going into the portal and then coming back. But why I bring it up, here is a tweet that I sent on April 5th. That's now 6-7 weeks ago at this point, 2023. I said, former 5-star Ugonna Onyenso will transfer from Kentucky. Add that in with UK essentially not being active in the craziest portal cycle ever, and it seems like John Calipari's entire offseason plan is, pray our freshman class next year is really, really good. Now, at the time, I didn't think very much of it when I sent it. I basically was saying, look, Kentucky, John Calipari, you got to get more active in the transfer portal. Kentucky fans didn't really want to hear it, though. So I looked at that tweet on Saturday after Keshad Johnson did not commit. After Kentucky is now in a situation where they have 7 scholarship players on May 21st, here are some of the responses that I got from Kentucky fans that day. Travis Peak said, I'll defer to you since you know every single thing that the Kentucky staff is doing and who they're talking to. Linda Chase responded to that tweet, exactly. He acts like he knows what the coaching staff is doing. It's already been said that they've reached out to other players, so I say Torres doesn't know as much as he thinks he does. Coach Junior 1_ on Twitter says, bro has no sources, LOL. Anthony Giorgio says, UK has been a lot more active with the portal than you think. Should I keep going? I'll read you a few more. Vince Cali says, this is just a stupid take. You have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. I guarantee Cal has a short list of what he wants, and not everyone has entered the portal yet. Finally, Brent Lamb said, Calipari literally said 2 weeks ago that the portal for them was 2 weeks away. He said there will be many more players opting for the portal than what was happening a month ago. Those were just some of the tweets that I got on that day, and I'm not rereading them to pat myself on the back. I'm not rereading them to say I was right and you were wrong. Why I am rereading them is because whether you're a Kentucky fan, a UConn fan, a Louisville fan, a St. John's fan, whoever fan, I don't want any program to fail, especially the big ones. Kentucky, Big Blue Nation, is one of the biggest, probably the biggest, if most passionate fan base in college basketball. It is good for me when Kentucky basketball is good. And so I bring it up because when I say something like that, it's not because I want the downfall of your program. It's because I am trying to warn you that your coach is not being active enough. And so with it, what I want to do now is explain why I sent out the tweet and why John Calipari is failing Kentucky basketball fans right now. And you know my stance. I don't call for Calipari to be fired. I don't say he's the worst thing ever. I think there were 1 or 2 things goes another way. Kentucky is not nearly like this season wasn't as bad as people think. Okay. But why I bring it up, when I sent out that tweet, it wasn't because I'm a hater. It isn't because I'm rooting against your program. It is because I am trying to tell you how things work in the transfer portal. And one thing that I think is important to clarify, important to explain, and I don't think John Calipari has fully figured this out yet. Portal recruiting is very, 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 very different than high school basketball recruiting, okay? And this is what I think Calipari is missing now, and this is what I think he was missing back in early April. Portal recruiting, let's go to high school recruiting first, okay? High school recruiting is really, it is a 2-3 year build in terms of relationships. You watch a kid as a sophomore. More realistically, you probably watch him as a junior. You're impressed. You offer him a scholarship at one of these EYBL or Adidas 3, whatever, one of these events. You have a coach there. You offer the player. Then he sends out the tweet. He's so happy. He shares your logo. And then from there, things kind of slow down. At some point in the fall, you plan a visit. He goes through his junior year. And then his senior year, you have him on campus for an official visit. He commits. Mom and dad are there. He puts on the hat. Everybody has a great time. That is like a 2.5 year process. At the very least, it is an 18-month process from the time that the school has determined that you are good enough to play for them, usually until a player commits. Most of the best players do not commit until their senior year of high school, the summer before, going in, the fall of, the winter of, okay? Transfer portal recruiting is very different. First off, if we're being perfectly honest, most players, before they enter the portal, kind of have an idea of where they're probably going to go, or at least of schools that they're interested in. As a matter of fact, a lot of people think it's this tampering thing. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. Sometimes it's somebody for the player reaching out to a school that the player is interested in saying, hey, if we got in the portal, would you have a spot for us? And so oftentimes players go into the portal knowing either where they're going to go or where one of the favorites is. And then once they get in the portal, everybody has access to them. Sometimes they end up at the spot, sometimes they don't. But in general, for most players, they enter the portal, then there's an insane wave of contact. That's when they get the 100 calls and the 40 offers and whatever. And then they take a visit or two, and then they usually commit. Now, there is always an exception to the rule. But what Hunter Dickinson did this year is not normal. What Hunter Dickinson did entering the portal Final Four weekend, I think it was like March 29th when he entered. He committed like May 7th. Usually it's not a 5-6 week period. Usually it's because players of Hunter Dickinson's caliber do not enter. And so because of it, most players, it's really a 2-week window. They enter the portal, crazy rush of contact, narrow the list down to 2 or 3 schools, take 2 or 3 visits, and they're usually committed like 10 days after they enter the portal. Go ahead and look it up, pick the player. Most players, they're not in the portal for that long, make a commitment. And so that's where I thought Calipari was failing before, and that's where I think he's failing now. Is at the end of the day, you cannot wait 2 weeks to reach out, 3 weeks to reach out, 2 weeks to reach out, and then maybe you set up a no, everything moves fast, and you have to be active, okay? I'll give you a quick example of how fast things move. At the Final Four this year, I saw a current Big 12 head coach that I know. I'm not going to name names. There's only 10 of them, whatever. But I was joking with him. I said, I saw him at an event, and I said, man, did you take 5 minutes away from the portal to come hang out here? And he kind of laughed and said, dude, he's like, you take 10 minutes away, you miss a lot. Now, the Final Four was a dead period. You couldn't have kids on campus, whatever. But I bring it up because he's like, literally, you step away for half an hour, there's 50 new names. And so the best stabs, they have guys that are constantly checking and then constantly communicating, hey, this guy just entered. Hey, that guy just entered. Hey, what about this guy? And then from there, you reach out, you determine if he's good enough, you determine if he's the right fit, and you bring him on campus. You don't wait and wait and wait and then reach out. And it's like, and you can sit here and say, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'll give you an example from last week. There was a player named Chad Baker Mazzara, ironically, who also played at San Diego State a few years ago. He's a JUCO kid now, so it's not apples to apples, but he had already taken visits. He had already narrowed his list down to 2 or 3. And then it gets out that Kentucky reached out to him as he's getting ready to make a commitment. And Kentucky fans got a little excited. And what do I need to know about this guy? And then boom, he commits to Auburn. You can't do that if you're Kentucky. And so this is my one thing. I'm not saying you have to recruit 40 guys in the portal. I'm not saying you have to get everybody. But as John Calipari likes to say, he tells his players all the time, I'll let you shoot shots. You don't have to make all of them, but you can't miss all of them too. And that's where he's at in recruiting. I'm not saying you got to get all these guys in the portal, but you can't miss on all of them either. And you can't get to them after they're already making their decision. You can't wait 2 weeks to reach out. You can't wait 2 weeks to vet. You got to be on the phone that day figuring out, is this guy good enough? Is he the right fit? Is he willing to play a role? Is he this? Is he that? And then you figure it out. 2 more thoughts on Kentucky before we get out of here and switch gears to the crazy USC story from the weekend. One, I don't know what Kentucky does from here. Now, I guess you could say the good news is that a couple things. One, the portal is sort of closed, but not really. One, there are still some good players in the portal. Arthur Kaluma from Creighton averaged 13 points per game last year, didn't have a great combine. I think if Keshad Johnson doesn't go to Arizona, this kid probably goes to Arizona. Kentucky, that's got to be their number one call. Get him on the phone today. Don't wait. Don't evaluate. Don't hesitate. Get him on the phone today and get him. There are other good players as well. I'm not going to go through every player in the portal. I ranked them on Friday, the best players available on Friday. If you want to go to Aaron Torres online, and we'll probably do a best players available video on YouTube at some point this week. There are still good players available, and there will be more players entering because remember, if you're an undergrad, you had to enter by May 11th. But if you're a grad transfer, you could still enter. Now, there is this pervasive opinion, I don't know. There's this opinion out there that there's going to be this crazy wave of grad transfers and blah, 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 blah. That I don't see. I think we could get some. I don't think we'll get many. So they got to act quick. They got to hope some good players enter the portal as grad transfers. And they also got to now hope at the NBA draft deadline that things break their way. I know Kentucky fans know this, but currently 3 players in the transfer portal or in the testing the NBA draft waters that could come back. 1, Antonio Reeves, I think probably will. Sharpshooter, 37 points at Bud Walton last year. The other 2, I'm not so sure on. Chris Livingston starting forward. I don't see it. I don't know why he's so adamant that he has to go pro. He might go undrafted. At best, he's a late second rounder, but he seems intent on staying in. And then Oscar Tshiebwe. And it is interesting because I remember doing a video on Oscar Tshiebwe, doing a segment on Oscar Tshiebwe, probably right around that April 5th, April 6th. And most Kentucky fans were like, we love Oscar, but it's time for him to move on. Now you kind of sort of need him. And to take it a step further, you need him and like 3 commitments after him just so you can run 5-on-5. Finally, let me add one last thought because I know I'm going to get it if I don't mention it. Got a lot of this from Kentucky fans. Kentucky fan, well, the only reason we lost him is because of NIL. And for people who don't know, we've talked about this a million times. But as I've said many times, there are really 2 schools of thought with NIL. There's one, the collective-based model of, hey, our boosters raise a bunch of money, put it in a pot, and we distribute it. By technicality, that's called pay for play. By technicality, that's illegal. By technicality, whatever. But increasingly, more schools are just like, nobody's going to police this, so this is how we're going to do it. There are still some schools like Kentucky, though, that are not making guarantees, that are not saying, if you come here, we're going to give you a baseline of this. What they're telling players is instead, if you come here, you can make up to this much. This is what our players made last year. And so I bring it up because when Kentucky lost Keshad Johnson, I saw a lot of Kentucky fans say, well, it's only because of NIL. And we're not promising anything. And this is why we're losing on everybody. Kentucky fans, I'm just here to tell you, if that's really how you feel, I don't want to be disrespectful, but it's not a good look. Okay, let me explain why that's absurd. First of all, I guarantee you, I promise you, Keshad Johnson's best NIL offer wasn't from Arizona. Arizona's not as advanced in NIL as everybody thinks, but let's take it a step further. Let's say I know nothing about NIL. Now, I know for a fact his best offer was not from Arizona. It wasn't from Kentucky either. I won't say who, but I know for a fact Arizona was not his best NIL offer, okay? But let's work under the assumption that I had no idea that. Let's use some common sense. If Arizona had crazy NIL money to give out, and they're just throwing around money left and right, then why are they scrambling to fill their roster like Kentucky is right now? Oh, it's because their NIL program isn't great. So that's one. I know for a fact Keshad Johnson's biggest NIL offer was not from Arizona. Oh, by the way, I know for a fact that Baylor Shireman last year, another player Kentucky fans complained about NIL with, his biggest offer was not from Creighton, where he ended up committing. Hunter Dickinson, that might be a different story. We'll get to him in a minute. Two, when I hear Kentucky fans say, well, transfers only want the biggest bag, a couple things stand out. One, you understand how many players entered the portal, right? There's something like 2,000 players entered the portal. And you mean to tell me that because of NIL, Kentucky couldn't land a single one since the portal opened over 2 months ago? And if you want to tell me, well, they're not all good enough to play Kentucky. Okay, I get it. Let's say 10% are good enough to play Kentucky. That seems like a reasonable number, right? That's still 200 players. And you can't convince one to come? You can't convince one to come to campus? Come on now, Kentucky. You're Kentucky. You're the gold standard. This is what your coach tells us. You're the gold standard. You're this, you're that. You're the New York Yankees, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Notre Dame football of college basketball. You can't get one transfer because of NIL? I'm sorry, I'm going crazy here, but it's these concepts, these things that people come up with drive me crazy. And lastly, let me say this about NIL. Do I think NIL is a factor in a lot of recruitments? I think it's a factor in every recruit, every single one. I really do. At the same time, though, let me also say this. I don't believe that for most student athletes, for most players, whether it's high school or the portal, I do not believe it is the biggest factor in their decisions. Now, are there some, especially transfers, whose biggest payday in basketball may be through NIL? I think there's some players who literally are making a decision solely on NIL. I don't think it's the vast majority, though. Let's use an example. What did I just say about Hunter Dickinson? We all followed his recruitment. We all believe, because multiple reports seem to indicate, that he went into every meeting and said, look, I need NIL money, and this is going to be a big part of my decision. I bring it up to say this. If Kansas wasn't coached by a Hall of Famer, if Hunter Dickinson didn't give Kansas a chance, if Kansas didn't give Hunter Dickinson a chance to win a national championship, if it didn't give him a chance to develop under one of the best coaches in the history of college basketball, do you think Hunter Dickinson would have gone to Kansas? Because I guarantee if it was just about NIL, if Hunter Dickinson just put out a tweet, I'm open for bids, highest bidder, I'm coming to you. You don't think Hunter Dickinson would have gone somewhere else? You don't think somebody else could have came up with more money than Kansas? I'm not going to name schools, but we could probably figure out who. If Hunter Dickinson just said, whatever it takes, start sending numbers. I'm going to be like a foreign baseball player. Submit numbers in an envelope. My agent will open them. Highest bidder wins my services. Somebody could have done better than Kansas. So to say that Kansas only got Hunter Dickinson because of NIL, it's ridiculous. I don't think anybody would believe that. So why would that be the case for Keshad Johnson or for this guy or for that guy? I could go on and on. I believe NIL is a factor for every single recruit. I don't believe it's the only factor for most of them.